Ian Trottier here for Discussions of Truth. We are at the Trump National Doral. We have just we're concluding another very successful AMP Fest, American
Priorities
Festival. And look, folks, we've got a very interesting and urgent situation, many situations, but state of the nation, basically, in America. And I've got an incredible patriot with a wonderful view to help you understand exactly what's happening to your country with me. The Woke Supremacy is the title of his book, an Anti-Socialist Manifesto. And the gentleman that is with me is Evan Sayet.
Indeed.
Evan, take a moment for listeners, please, sir, and would you tell them who you are?
Oh, sure. I started out, I'm a New York City-born liberal, lowercase L Jew. I was in the entertainment industry for 35 years, first a stand-up comedian. Then when my kids were born, I didn't want to be on the road so long, so I started writing TV shows that included Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher for a good number of years. My epiphany, my change, because as I say, New York City liberal Jew in the entertainment industry, no less, my default position was vote Democrat. My default position, at that point I knew exactly what liberals or Democrats tend to know. Democrats are good and Republicans are evil. That's all I really needed to know. I'm good, I must be a Democrat. Republicans like war. Democrats like peace. I like peace. I must be a Democrat. Democrats like the air. Republicans hate air, apparently. We hate this planet, Republicans do. Well, I like this planet. I like air. I must be a Democrat. But even as a brain-dead liberal, I knew just enough about the world that when we were attacked on 9/11, I wasn't surprised. Obviously, I didn't know the date. Obviously, I didn't know the target. Obviously, the amount of carnage sickened me. But even as a brain-dead liberal, I knew just enough about the world to know that the same people who were murdering the Jews of Israel for no other reason that they were the closest infidels, who are murdering Hindus in India for no other reason they were the closest infidels, who are murdering children in Russia for no other reason they were the closest infidels, would, when they could figure out a way across those giant oceans, come and get the big infidel, the great Satan. Of course they would. What surprised me was what I metaphorically call 9/12. That's the days, the weeks, the months, and the years after 9/11, and the leftist response to it, the Democratic Party response to it, the idea that we deserved it, that we had provoked it, that in the words of my president, Barack Obama, in the words of his spiritual mentor, Jeremiah Wright, it was the chickens coming home to roost, because America is just so evil. Well, that made no sense to me. And the idea that the way to prevent further attacks was to be nicer to the terrorists, well, this was insane to me. And so I started to think about what I believed politically. And you can have an expression, the first time you think is the last time you're a Democrat. Right? Once you actually think about the issues, what's true, what's right, what's good, it's the last time that you can support the political left. And so I started to think about each issue and where I actually stood on it. And on every single one, not only did I find that the true liberal, lowercase L position was in the Republican Party, but I found that in every single case across the board, no matter the issue, the modern liberal who dominates the Democratic Party now will side with evil over good, wrong over right, ugly over beautiful, profane over profound, and failure over success.
Evan, that's a powerful statement that you're saying. Are you saying that the culture instilled in the Democrat Party over the past couple of decades, let's say, because you're addressing 9/11, are you saying that they are basically embracing a type of theology or concept of government that promotes someone not to think?
Oh, indeed. That's actually the premise of my previous book and the speech that made me famous. If we take the story that I was just telling just a little bit further, I started to develop an understanding of how the political left thinks in America. And after giving speeches along the way, I took my speech to the Heritage Foundation in 2007. and it became the single most viewed lecture in Heritage Foundation's entire history. Andrew Breitbart, who later became a friend and a colleague of mine, but at that point I did not know him, he called it one of the 5 most important conservative speeches ever given. Because I explained why it is that such good, smart, decent, loving, caring people, like our friends who vote Democrat, like my family members who vote Democrat, like my colleagues in Hollywood who vote Democrat, they're not evil, yet they will reject fact and reason, and in doing so, invariably side with evil, failure, and wrong. And I'll just give you 2 examples, one domestic, one foreign. How do you look at what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and decide that Michael Brown was a sweet and innocent kid who had his hands up pleading, don't shoot, and was gunned down by yet another evil, white, racist cop? How do you get it so wrong? Right? How do you look at the Middle East and decide that the problem in the Middle East is not the Islamic fascists, the homophobic, xenophobic, misogynistic, I do believe even a little bit anti-Semitic Islamic states, but the problem is that tiny little liberal democracy of Israel, and not only are they the problem in the Middle East, but they're the only nation in the entire world that you are going to seek to strangle to death economically through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. How do you get it so wrong? And I gave an explanation in that talk in 2007 that was so satisfying to so many that this 47-minute wonkish speech, okay, those don't go viral. 5-minute things go viral, 2-minute things go viral, 10-minute things go viral. This 47-minute speech with me standing in front of a microphone went so insanely viral that National Review Online put up a bulletin that said, this talk from Evan Sayet, and they linked to it, this talk from Evan Sayet is cramming our inboxes. Please stop sending it. And I said, it became the single most viewed lecture in Heritage Foundation's history because I explained in a cogent, satisfying, true way why it is the liberal will ignore fact and reason and side with evil, failure, and wrong.
You're bringing in some interesting elements here, and you're talking about Israel. You're applying these topics of government and governance through Israel and their democratic values and that struggle. But you're also bringing it back home to the United States in your delivery to the Heritage Foundation. How does the 2020 Democratic Party values differ from those of, let's say, one of what many Americans consider, regardless of political party, JFK? How does this party differ from a JFK Democrat?
Right. Well, a JFK Democrat would be a Republican today. John F. Kennedy would be despised. He'd be a white supremacist. He'd be a warmonger who cut taxes for the rich. He would be absolutely despised by today's Democratic Party. I mean, just think of his most famous quotation, his most iconic quotation. Ask not what your country can do for you. Oh, what does the leftist believe today? Not only ask, but demand. You're entitled to your country doing virtually everything for you.
Don't think. You're a robot. You're a servant. That's where I go with that.
Well, actually, I go back to that original speech, and the question you didn't ask was, okay, so you gave this explanation that was so satisfying to so many. What is it? And when I gave that original talk, I started to receive emails by the hundreds, by the thousands, and 5, 7, 10 of them included this really odd phrase, but 7 or 10 of them out of the thousands, but used this phrase over and over again. They said, you know what you have there in that talk? You've got the unified field theory of liberalism. Because once you understood what I said in that 47-minute talk, you understood everything about why don't think. Why that. And so, shall I tell you? So,
please.
Okay, when I wrote the book, The KinderGarden of Eden, it's based on that original speech, and I actually put it together as a unified field theory, a scientific theory. So it has 4 laws and 3 corollaries. For the sake of time, I'll give you the first 2 laws. That's all you're going to need. And I'm going to give it to you as written in the book, and then I'll explain. Right, the first law of the unified field theory of liberalism is the modern liberal. That's anybody born after World War II, getting worse with each successive generation, for reasons I'll explain afterwards if you wish. But the modern liberal has been raised to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative because its opposite is discrimination. In the 1980s, By no coincidence, when the first babies born after World War II, who became the children of the 60s, when they became the powers that be in the 80s, in the universities, in academia, in education, in entertainment, in news, in the 1980s, thinking was effectively outlawed. Right? The thinking behind the outlawing of thinking is this. Anything you believe in, anything I believe, anything your listeners believe, anything anybody believes is going to be so tainted by your personal prejudices. Prejudices we can't help but have just as being human beings. Prejudices based on things like the color of your skin, the nation of your ancestry, your height, your weight, your sex, and so on. Anything that you believe is going to be so tainted by your personal prejudices that the only way not to be a bigot is to never think at all.
That's pretty clever to real stuff.
Okay, let me give you the second law, though, because that only gets us halfway there. If you don't think at all, then you would think sometimes the Democrats would be right, sometimes they'd be wrong, and most of the time they'd fall somewhere in the middle. Why are they always not only wrong, but as wrong can be? And that's the second law of the unified field theory of liberalism. Again, I'll give it to you as written in the book, and then explain. Indiscriminateness of thought does not lead to indiscriminateness of beliefs. It leads only and always to siding with evil over good, wrong over right, ugly over beautiful, etc. Why? Because if nothing is better than anything else, then success is unjust. Why should a person, a nation, a culture, a religion, why should something succeed if it's not better than anything else? Flip it over. Failure, as proved by nothing other than the fact that it has failed, is proof positive that somehow the failure has been victimized. Finally, just by extension, if success and failure is proof positive of injustice, then great success and great failure is proof positive of great injustice. And just one more time, exceptional success and exceptional failure is proof positive in and of itself of the most exceptional injustices of all. This is why the two nations they hate most on this earth are not the two most evil nations. There's no argument to be made that America and Israel are the two worst nations. You could say we've done bad things. You can say to point to slavery. You can point to. There's no argument, scientific, moral, legal, diplomatic, none, that says America and Israel are the two worst nations in the world. So why do the Democrats hate America and Israel first and foremost and exceptionally so? Because they're the two most exceptional, the two most successful nations. And if success and failure proves injustice, then the two most successful nations must be the two most unjust nations.
So what is it from your line? What is it that stuck out at you, Evan, that said, wait a second, the Democrat Party doesn't reflect these values that you have? You've really dug in deep philosophically into the values that they have gravitated to and now embraced. Along that line, you're mentioning 9/11. What was your tipping point?
Well, 9/11 was you imagine yourself in a cave and all you've ever been told is there's nothing out there, there's nothing out there, there's nothing out there, there's nothing out there. All it really takes is just a pinprick and for light to come in and you say, I don't know what's out there, but they lied to me, there's something out there. So that the 9/11, and actually more than 9/11, it was their response to 9/11. Again, 9/11 didn't surprise me. Had they responded, those sons of bitches, we're going to get them, instead of saying America deserved it, I don't think I would have opened my eyes.
And by they, you're
the Democrats, the left, the political left. Had they responded in a way that recognized good and evil, and okay, like the Toby Keith song, a sucker punch came from somewhere in the back, but instead they joined with the sucker punchers. They sided against America, and I saw this again with President Bush, who I was still not on the political left then. I voted for Gore in 2000 mindlessly because I had just pulled the lever for the D. I knew D was good, R was bad still at that point. But when they were leading up to the war in Iraq, and I was listening to them attack America and make Saddam Hussein sound like a good guy. They kept elevating Saddam Hussein. Of course but he's done some good things too. And tear down George Bush. Okay, even then, once the war was a fait accompli, once our troops were on the ground, they still lied about us. When Abu Ghraib came along and Dick Durbin compared us to the Nazis, all right, and I'm saying, we've got troops on the ground. We're fighting this man who in just 10 short years had invaded Kuwait, who invaded Iran, had bombed Saudi Arabia, had bombed Israel, had committed atrocities against the Kurds in the north, was committing genocide against the Marsh Arabs in the south. And you're lying about our troops? And this was insane. And what would lead them to do this? And it's not just politics. If it were just politics, that would be scumbagian enough. All right? That would be evil enough. But it really wasn't. It's because they really do flip-flop good and evil in their minds. Because if nothing is good, nothing is evil, because you're indiscriminate, then anything that people think is good must be the beneficiary of some prejudice. Anything that you think is evil must be the victim of some bigotry.
It's a complete manipulation on the natural thought, basically.
It's the elimination of natural thought, which in place reverses it. Because again, if nothing is better than anything else, and that's the only moral position you're allowed to take. Because anything else, if you think the Islamicists are bad, that might just be your Islamophobia. So the way you eliminate Islamophobia is you don't think that they're bad. You don't think. So then if they're not bad, then why do I think they're bad? I must be an Islamophobe. Indiscriminateness is the only thing they're allowed to believe. They're only allowed to believe that no culture, no religion, no form of governance, no sex, no familial construct, nothing is better than anything else. They're not allowed to consider whether that's true or not.
Evan, this is a really interesting point of view, and for me, it sounds similar to a panopticon. If you're familiar with that, it sounds like you are. Let's get back to JFK, because we've got, what is it now, 70 years that have created this amorphous, this total change in the Democratic Party. And I like to kind of look at steps that we're taking, and I look at things that evolve. How is it that the Democratic Party, we can talk about the Republican Party, but what sort of influences outside did that party embrace that made this drastic change?
Yeah, well, what we're watching is the culmination of the 60s radical attempt at revolution. The 60s radicals came along and they made no bones about it. They were violent people. They were bloodthirsty people. They were hate-filled people. And quite frankly, they were mentally ill. William Ayers was I'll give you an idea how mentally ill they were. At the very first meeting of the terror group, the Weather Underground, right, founded by William Ayers and Bernardine Dorn. But let me take a step back. Bernardine Dorn had already by then approached a bank of microphones and said, "Hi, I'm Bernardine Dorn, and I'm going to read to you a declaration of war." I mean, they literally declared war. They told us what they wanted to do, which was to overthrow America and replace it with their utopian ideology. And they committed acts of war. And as part of these acts of war, they founded a terror group, not unlike Antifa. They founded a terror group called the Weather Underground. At the very first meeting of the Weather Underground, they took time out to cheer Charles Manson. They cheered Charles Manson both because they were bloodthirsty and mentally ill. William Ayers is mentally ill. Mark Rudd was mentally ill and violent and vicious. And they cheered him because they loved the blood, but they wanted something else too. I don't know, because you're awfully young, if you remember the expression helter skelter. They wrote it in blood on the wall at the Tate LaBianca murders, the most famous murders. And helter skelter means an apocalyptic race war. That's what Charles Manson was trying to start. And that is what William Ayers and his fellow social warriors back then, social justice warriors back then, I call them the founders of the woke supremacy, they wanted to start a race war. Why? Because it would divide America and then they could conquer. Right? If blacks were setting cities on fire and killing people, hey, that's half the battle in America. And proof of this is twofold. One, when the founders of the woke supremacist movement, when the William Ayers and the radicals of the 60s came along and could have affiliated with either party. They didn't have a party affiliation yet. They were new. They were just coming up. They did not choose to join with the party of abolition, the Republicans. They didn't choose to join with the party of women's suffrage, the Republicans. They didn't choose to side with the party of the then still recent 1957 Civil Rights Act. They joined the party of slavery. They joined the party of Indian removal. They joined the party of segregation and Jim Crow and the party of George Wallace. Why? Because they wanted hatred between the races. They were using race as a wedge, so they didn't want the United States. And when the civil rights movement broke into two, and half of it was led, or one movement was led by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the other was led by a man who called himself Malcolm X, rather than siding with Martin Luther King, who wanted equality, they sided with X, who was if you look at Martin Luther King's movement, it was Judeo-Christian in value, it was peaceful in practice, and it was pro-American in objective. X was Muslim in theology, it was violent in practice, and it was anti-American in objective. And when they had a choice between joining with Martin Luther King or joining with Malcolm X, William Ayers still has a picture of Malcolm X up in his office. He still has quotes from Malcolm X on the door of his, he's not retired, but just a few years ago, still had quotes from Malcolm X on the door of his university office. And so when it didn't matter to them, you think of them as part of the civil rights movement. They were not at all. They were anti the civil rights movement. It was the good guys who were on the side of of Martin Luther King. And the reason they joined with Malcolm X and the reason they joined with George Wallace, you would think those are opposite things, right? One was a black separatist and the other was a white supremacist. And how is it possible they joined with both? Because it didn't matter to the woke supremacists whether Wallace made whites hate blacks or X made blacks hate whites, as long as we hated each other. Right. Their revolution failed. And the reason it failed is they couldn't get anybody to join them. Because, man, yeah.
Well, thank you, Evan. You caught that. Just for clarify, the revolution in a physical sense is what you're talking about failed.
Well, it failed in its original intent at that point. So that they changed tactics at that moment. But let me explain why it failed. Because they couldn't find anybody from the last of the great generations who knew the real world, who had either fled from the socialism of Nazism that they were pushing, or fled the socialism of Stalinism, or were one of the millions of people who'd gone over from America to fight them, saw how horrible it was, and came home. They couldn't get anybody who lived in the real world to join their sick, bloodthirsty fantasy. And so they sort of went underground at that point. They did what's called the long march through the institutions. Mm-hmm. They decided that they would take 10, 20, 30 years, and slowly, as the last of the great generations moved on, retired, or through whatever other means, but they slowly took over the education of Americans. They turned our schools into their ministry of indoctrination. And
so, Evan, when you say they again, you're saying this is the Bill Ayers,
the Bill Ayers, the Jerry Rubins, the Mark Rudds, the when you think of the '60s radicals, mm-hmm. and perhaps who and what they were has faded over time. It's still very clear in my memory.
Yeah.
I was around in the 60s. I was young, but certainly into the 70s. But it was the 60s radical movement that kidnapped Patty Hearst. Kidnapped Patty. I mean, they kidnapped
Iberian
people.
Bank.
They raped people. They robbed banks. They blew up buildings. They killed cops. In fact, it was Mark Rudd, another bloodthirsty, mentally ill founder of the woke supremacist movement, who said, it must be a wonderful feeling to kill a pig, a cop. The bloodier, the better. I mean, these were bloodthirsty folks who then went on to be...
This is published.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It said it for public, to be heard by the public. So they took over slowly the education and turned it into their ministry of indoctrination. They took over news and entertainment and turned it into their ministries of propaganda. Now they have the ministry of social communications. And it was Rudd who said the true flowering of the 60s will come in the 90s when we've taken over the institutions. He was wrong. And the reason he was wrong is only because he missed the obvious. Once they'd taken over the institutions, they now would need a few more years to use those institutions to brainwash successive generations coming through their institutions. And so if it's 30 years from the 60s to the 90s, what's 30 years from the 90s?
Well, we seem to be sitting in it.
Right? Which is why all this seems to suddenly have been come up. It's because it's now 2020, 2021. And it's why they've taken off their mask. It was only a few years ago that Barack Obama wouldn't even use the word revolution. He still said fundamental transformation, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Now, Bernie Sanders makes no bones about calling it the revolution. Right? Just a few years ago, nobody would call themselves a socialist in public. But now if you're not a socialist, you're a bad person. And now you're back to the exact rhetoric of the 60s, calling the police pigs, calling for their murder. All these things. In fact, the thing that made Colin Kaepernick first appear on the screen of the leftists was when he went on the field, the practice field, wearing a pair of socks that depicted the police as pigs. All right, so we're now back to the rhetoric. We're now back because they're finally admitting what they've always been, but they didn't have the stormtroopers. They didn't have the social justice warriors created, but now they feel they do. Now they feel they got the numbers.
The foot's on the ground, the feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Let's get we got Israel here, and when you mentioned socialism, Evan, I sit back and I say, okay, well, we've got Bill Ayers and we've got the whole argument here with Bernie Sanders, and you're right, he's blatantly throwing these things out, these terms out there, and Americans seem to be passively just taking that with a grain of salt. It's whatever it is, Obama and these tactics here. But if I sit back, Evan, I'm saying, wait a second, hold on. These are German-based philosophical approaches to government. So if we shed that facade of, okay, well, this is Bill Ayers and this is the '60s movement. What are the needles that work their way into the fabric, the American fabric, that got people like Bill Ayers to take these sides and say, yes, I am going to pound these into the Constitution? Or can we simply say, hey, these are from Karl Marx, or is there something else going on here?
Well, I think there's two questions in there. One is we were so liberal, we being America, so lowercase L liberal, that we allowed this infiltration.
Our borders were open.
Our borders were open. Our schools were open. You know what? America is so obviously great that nothing. And so go ahead and teach and we allowed them to infiltrate. We allowed them to take over. One thing about socialism that people misunderstand: it is not an ideology. People think socialism is an ideology. It is not. It's an economic model and a government system that can be embraced and has been embraced by any number of ideologies over the years. Leninism wasn't Marxism. Leninism wasn't Stalinism. Stalinism wasn't Maoism. Maoism wasn't Hitlerism. Hitlerism wasn't Castroism, and Castroism is the Ocasio-Cortezism. It's just a governing system whereby a handful of the people who most support that ideology control all the money and power. So a lot of times we'll compare the Democrats to the Nazis because we see so many parallels, but the parallels in the system, not in the ideology. In fact, wokeism is the antithesis of Nazism as far as the ideology goes, but it's almost irrelevant once the system has been embraced. But wokeism was supposed to be the antidote to all the supremacist movements that had ever been. Because the mistake that every other supremacist movement made was that they all said something. Whether it was in Marxism, it was a class that was better than everything else. If you were a proletariat, you were great, you were good. In Nazism, it was a race. If you were an Aryan, you were great. If everything else was... In Islamicism, it was a creed. If you embraced Islamicism, then you were okay, everybody else... And so the way they were going to eliminate the evils of a supremacist movement was to simply decree, that nothing is better than anything at all.
And you'll be happy with it.
And, well, you'll be happy with it because there'll be peace on earth. There'll be, if there's nothing to fight about, then there'll be no fighting. If there's no fighting, there'll be no war. If there's no war, there'll be no atrocities. It's only because you think you're better that you bully me. It's only because you think you're better that you go to war. So if you can eliminate the recognition of the better, and in fact, you go back to my very original speech and my book, The KinderGarden of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks, if mankind lost paradise when we ate the apple and gained knowledge of right and wrong, of good and evil, they believe that if we could just regurgitate the apple, give up all knowledge of good and evil, give up all recognition of better and worse, give up all, we could go back to paradise. And that's what they mean by the Great Reset. That Great Reset is all the way back to the KinderGarden of Eden.
Incredible thought. I hadn't heard that before. Kindergarten, of course, the German term that was adopted by the English speakers.
But kindergarten also being the secular Garden of Eden. You know, the Garden of Eden is a more biblical example, but you're innocent and naive, and you don't know the horrors of the real world when you're still in kindergarten. So that's the secular version of the Garden of Eden. And if they can just retard your moral and intellectual growth at the level of a 5-year-old child, before you learn good and evil, before you learn, then you can have the perfect world just so long as nobody ever grows up.
Yeah, and they control it.
Indeed.
Yeah, you mentioned banking system here, and you mentioned the Great Reset. These are listeners that may be familiar with this through Klaus Schwab. I want to thread in Israel here as a Jew and as a man that loves Israeli values and also loving American values, and how the political system is mixing and meshing and really distorting these values. Is there an underlying issue going on here, Evan, in that the political system, perhaps it's the Democrat system, has been manipulated financially? That may sound like a very shallow question, but I want you to explain to listeners your understanding of the threats of the financial system in the United States and how that does thread in, from your understanding and view, into a possible manipulation of a political party, existing political party in the country.
Yeah, I'm not so keen on the financial look. No, there's no doubt that he who has the money has an ability to control, to influence, to heavily influence. You know, if I have the money to go on television advertise, obviously I have an advantage in my ability to influence. As far as these master puppeteers, I don't think it's the financial system that's doing it. I think there's a handful of people like George Soros who may be doing it. But I think it's more that we have entered a time unlike anything in human history where, think about this, from the dawn of time until just after I was born, so the whole modern liberal era, from the dawn of time until the modern liberal era, every human being who existed had to worry about certain things, such as hunger, poverty, physical pain, war, real prejudice, not hurt feelings, not real prejudice, like concentration camps. Like, once America became the dominant power around the world and the dominant influence around the world, people born just after me or when I became sentient, what disease did we have to worry about until this pandemic? All right, smallpox, vanquished. Chickenpox, vanquished. Polio, vanquished. Right? Hunger in America, there is no such thing, except for perhaps the mentally or the drug-addled or the mentally incapable. But outside of that, we have so much abundance in this country as far as food goes that if somebody gives you $1, you can go to the 99-cent store. All right? So nobody's really starving like Calcutta used to be. So nobody had to really worry about hunger. Nobody had to really worry about communicable diseases. Nobody had to really worry about war because right after the Vietnam War, it all became voluntary. And because America was so strong, there was no such thing as war. Nobody had to worry about physical pain because this miracle drug that never existed before, aspirin, and go from there to the synthetic things. And they can now, they call them sawbones because they used to saw off your bones and they would give you a bullet to bite on, quite literally. All right? So we now live in a world where it seems that nothing can go wrong, right? And so in
a comfortable situation.
Well, where nothing can go wrong, where you can be as stupid, you can be and you will still eat. You can be as stupid and you will still be held. You will still live a long life. Right? So in a society where nothing can go wrong, the correct answer to everything is the utopian answer, is the indiscriminate answer. If nothing can go wrong, then why not let everybody come in from the southern border? Right? If nothing can go wrong, then and so they can be indiscriminate because we had been so wealthy, we had been so safe, because that's the way the last of the generations left us. But now we're reaching a point where that's no longer true. We're reaching a point where, for example, just use infrastructure. Okay, we didn't have to do anything with the infrastructure because our parents, the last of the great generations, had created an infrastructure so strong that we could take that money and piss it away. We could give it on welfare. And meanwhile, now we've gotten to the point where our infrastructure has not been serviced for 70, 80 years, 100 years, our electrical grid. And so up until now, they could be stupid, they could be wasteful, they could be Democrats. But now the time has come to where we have to make America great again, to borrow an expression, where we have to make greatness and not just cleverness the coin of the realm.
Evan, are you familiar with the German philosopher Friedrich Hegel?
I am somewhat.
Okay. Something that I talk about on a surface level here, Friedrich Hegel and the Hegelian dialectic, and this comes from Anthony Sutton, who's a former researcher at the Stanford Hoover Institute. Evan, what is happening right now in America that is happening, of course, on a global scale? What do Americans need to understand now, Evan, to preserve? And this is incredible that we're even saying this, because you're on top of this, and socialism is here. It's actively being mentioned. Bernie Sanders is talking about revolution. Kamala Harris, right? I mean, supporting.
It's funding the criminal activity, right? You have defunding the police while zero bond. Okay, that's that. I tell you, they side only and always with and actually, there's one of the corollaries in the 4 laws and 3 corollaries that says modern liberal policies always occur in tandem. Every effort to elevate in esteem, stature, and reward the evil, failed, and wrong is met with a concurrent policy to tear down the good, right, and successful. So at the same time that you have to fund the police, you have zero bond and zero bail to let them out of jail. And so what really needs to be done, we've got to, and I think there are people who are starting to get it. I see my old boss, Bill Maher, for example, starting to get it. There is a big difference between clever and true. And you'll notice, and this is actually part of my stand-up act, probably my best bit in my stand-up act, where I point out that every profession that we associate with leftism is a profession that's all talk, but no action. So you've got the academic who lectures to children. You've got the journalist who writes about what other people do. You have the politician who mandates what other people do, but they don't have a job themselves. There's nothing they make. There's nothing they produce. And of course, you got the entertainer who only pretends to be doing the things that the people who do things do. All right? And then you've got the people who do things and make things. And they have to be right. You know, they think of themselves as smarter because maybe they stayed in school longer, or maybe they're more clever. Maybe perhaps they have a better vocabulary, a bigger vocabulary. They're not smart. They're clever. And as I think it was Thomas Sowell said, who said, it's a cleverness used, no, it was actually, I will get it, I promise. But it's a cleverness used for the purpose of making us all stupid. And actually, and I can't believe I can't think of Voltaire. And it was Voltaire who said it in response to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau had just written Emily, and he wrote back. He sent it to Voltaire, and Voltaire wrote back, "I'm in I'm obviously paraphrasing, or at least attempting to paraphrase. But he said, I'm in receipt of your new book, and I congratulate you on it. However, I do not think I'm agile enough to get back on all fours and crawl back into the crib. And he said, your cleverness is in the purpose of making us all stupid. And that's what today's left is. Their cleverness is designed to make us all stupid. And they've succeeded.
Seems to be working.
Yep, they've succeeded.
Not with you, however.
But, well, not with me, and not with the people who have red state jobs, all right, who have real jobs. The farmers, the electricians, the mechanics, the oil field workers, the people who actually have to be right. And they may go, the 2 and 2 is 4, but they know it's 4. And that's much smarter than the Harvard professor who will give me an 8-page paper on why it's really 8. And there are academics, there are Democrats, there are liberals who are saying 2 and 2 isn't 4. Look it up, Google it. They are arguing that, saying that 2 and 2 and 4 is racist.
Sounds like a very confused state of mind to be living in.
Indeed.
Evan, we're going to do this again. We're going to wind down as we're closing out time. What an incredible, wonderful discussion here, and I appreciate you taking the time, sir. Please, in your closing statement, not a statement, but closing thoughts here for listeners, a message that you want. Evan, a message that you want listeners to walk away with.
Okay, twofold. We didn't really discuss it. I'm glad we didn't discuss it. It's fine, but I am promoting a book. So everybody buy my book, The Woke Supremacy. It's available. It actually was the #1 download in political science on Amazon, which is saying something. I mean, that political science is a big category, and it was the #1 download. Two things. One, it's easy to get downhearted looking at the fact that they own the media, they own the education system, they own electronic communications, the social communications, and go, well, what can one person do? And just to do not be so downhearted, because twofold. One, I'm going to give you an assignment. They own the media, but we own the truth. That means that they can hit 1 million people at once with their lies. We have to be 1 million people talking to one person at a time. And that's all you have to do is talk to one person at a time. So I've got a program I call Adopt a Democrat. Just find one person in your life who you know. Still post the lever for the D because they've never heard from our side what we believe. Where would they have heard it? What TV show would they have watched? What school would they have gone to? What church would they have attended? They would have heard what we believe from us. And so we can no longer be, well, I don't want to fight. I don't want to go to Thanksgiving or Passover or Christmas and fight. It's too late for that. You need to speak up. And what you're going to find is there aren't very many people who vote Democrat. In fact, I don't know anybody. I'm a New York City born liberal Jew in the entertainment industry. I don't know anybody who votes Democrat. I know a lot of people who vote against the Republicans because the left has done such a good job of villainizing us. And if we don't speak up, then that's the only thing they hear. And so they're not voting for the Democrats, they're voting against the evil people who are going to be worse. The reason that Hitler put the Jews into ghettos was to remove their voice from the community so that they could not counter the lies of the supremacy with their humanity. Well, when we don't speak, we are self-ghettoizing. And that has to end, because it's going to end poorly if we don't speak up. And think about this. All you have to do is change one person. You don't have to change everybody. You don't have to get a new television station. You don't have to change one person. Because if we all change one person, simple math, we double our numbers. It's just that simple. And I'll end on a very hopeful note, if I may. Good people are always slow to the fight. America has always been slow to the fight. We don't want to fight. We're the true liberals, lowercase l. Live and let live. Right? We've got better things to do than fight. We've got family, we got businesses, we got church, we got Little League, But when we fight to win. And keep in mind, we were slow to World War I. We were slow to World War II. We were slow to the Cold War, and we've been slow to the culture war. Well, we won World War I, we won World War II, we won the Cold War, and we will win the culture war.
Ladies and gentlemen, Evan Sayet, The Woke Supremacy and Anti-Socialist Manifesto. Buy it now.
Right now.